Okay, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us today. We are live on Facebook with a lot of interesting people. My name is Leora Levy. I am from ASI. I am the member experience manager. And our topic today is going to be very interesting, because if 2020 taught us anything, it was that wine, along with most other world industries, need to embrace the digital medium. This month, we have been focusing on how to help sommelier and other industry professionals use social, digital, and other online platforms to their fullest. We've gathered some leading tech-savvy sommeliers and industry experts together to talk about how they are taking advantage of their computers, laptops, and smartphones to market themselves in the digital sphere. Our guests today include Hendrik Thoma, a master sommelier from Germany. Hi, Hendrik. Amber LeBeau from the US, living in England currently. And she has her own digital wine calendar, which I think is just absolutely amazing. And then we have even been using it as well this time for our virtual wine event, marketing it. We have Pauline Vicard from ARENI Global, and we have Anaïs, the Marketing and Communications Director from Vinexposium. So welcome everyone. Basically, when COVID grounded and isolated the wine world, it became quickly apparent that the industry as a whole had some catching up to do, obviously. And historically reliant on fostering community and building relationship in a traditional manner, the past 2 years have ushered in a new reality for the wine world. We are honored to have all of you here with us today. And you all have an impact of digital in the present and how it's shaping our future. Pauline Vicard, just to introduce you a little bit more, you have ARENI Global, which is a think tank tasked with thinking about the future of fine wine. And Amber, you don't only think digital, you basically live it, because you founded virtualwineevents.com. And obviously, again, SuperSomm and infotainer, we call you an infotainer, Hendrik Thoma, master sommelier. You have an undeniable digital presence. And obviously, Anaïs from partner of ASI, Vinexposium. You've launched the first ever online wine fair for Wine Paris, Vinexpo Paris last June with the Vinexposium Connect digital portal. So let's start with you, Pauline. The world of fine wine is historically slow to embrace change. I think we can all agree upon that. Do you think the changes we've seen in digital marketing and communications over the last 2 years are the start of a permanent shift in thinking, or were they more a short-term solution to a problem?
Hi, and thank you so much for having me. Thanks, Yora, for this very interesting question that could require, I don't know, 2 hours to answer. But the short version of the answer would be a bit of both, which I think more of the, can't remember that was the first or the second, but the long-term shift, if that makes sense. Yeah. Because if you take a step back and look what's been implemented in the last 2 years, most of the time, wineries, retailers, trade fairs, importers, they all wanted to go digital. They knew they would have to do something, and they had the plan somewhere in the box, right? And they were hoping to implement maybe in the next 5 years. And then suddenly they didn't have the time, and they had to implement in like 2 weeks, more than the 5 years that they thought they would have. So I don't think COVID, made the need for digital visible. It was always like people knew they had to go to digital a bit more. It just accelerated things. And one of the things that would also lead me to believe that it's going to be a long-term shift is, like, for the very first time, maybe all the CEOs and exec teams, so all the senior people that are usually, if you follow the cliche, a bit less tech savvy than the rest of their teams, had to use digital in everything that they had to do at home, from following the schools with the kids, or ordering online, or everything, even to have their conversation online. So they actually lived through the need of more digital, and they had to use the tools themselves, which is always important for digital to go from something which is tools and tactics to something which is really strategy, and having a marketing strategy that has digital at the center. So that's one of the good signs. And if you look at like what did wineries and retailers and importers used digital for in the last 2 years? Well, they used it for conversation. So that's one of the things that you and I have been doing the webinar for ASI or for ARENI. Anaïs, that's also something that you've worked on with Vinexpo, having those platforms for conversation, because they are so important for the wine world, to share good practice, to follow on trends, to know what's happening, everything that we used to do just by meeting someone at Vinexpo and sharing a glass of wine or going from stand to stand, we had to do it in the digital world. And I think, and Anaïs might have a different perspective, but from my perspective, using the digital platform to create conversation has been really successful, because people really share and exchange quite a lot. Then they've used digital to occupy the space, to have the thought leadership scene, so something that's more linked to brand equity and brand awareness. And I think they've seen that it was quite successful as well to reach another audience, to cut on the travel, so also, going well with their sustainability issue and having less impact on the environment. And they've also seen that digital could lead to more sales when they had the right tools and the right process. So all in all, I think those last 2 years have demonstrated in a very accelerated way that digital was a way to bring growth, whatever stage of the fine wine world you were on. But I think that there are some things that now that hopefully the biggest part of the storm has passed, that we need to take time to reflect on and maybe adjust in order to make sure that we lever the most growth. I think we've implemented a lot of things very quickly, and now we can take a bit of time to see what's worked, what didn't work, what we can adjust, what we can fine tune, making sure that digital is always at the center. I could talk more on this, but I want to hear everything that other people have to say.
Good. No, but I totally agree. It's time to sit down and sort a little bit, a little bit of a sorting of what works, what doesn't work, where to focus.
And also for the fine wine world in particular, finding the right balance between physical and digital, because digital has allowed things that we didn't expect would be possible, but it's not going to replace, as I think everyone knows, part of what we find in physical gathering. And consumers, and this I can talk with some data, we had a big study on the fine wine consumers and what they were expecting, and notably what they were expecting from their wine merchants. And there are still a certain level of friction that expected when you deal with fine wine. They don't want just to have to deal with a digital platform. They want to have a human integrated somewhere. So it's all, I think the time is now to find how you can use digital as a process to simplify operations so that you can focus on the human relationship and finding that right balance.
Completely agree. But speaking about community, Amber, virtual wine events was born out of frustration, I believe, at how little was being communicated in any systematic way. Can you talk a little bit about those initial days and what you see as the future for online events?
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be on this panel with such brilliant folks that I really admire. I founded Virtual Wine Events May 1st of 2020, last year, in the middle of the pandemic, when, like everybody else, I was stuck at home, not being able to do anything. But as more places got into lockdown, it was interesting with how just the abundance of online wine events. I mean, everybody just kind of took to it. Kind of reminds me of, like, toddlers playing football, somebody kicked the ball and everybody's chasing after it. But it was tough to kind of keep track of things. And also I found with some events, especially like on Instagram Live, unless you already discovered who was doing it and you were actively following them, you wouldn't know about some of these great Instagram Lives that were happening. So there really wasn't any communication or promotion that was going on. And so created virtualwineevents.com as a calendar page to where people can go, see what's happening today, see what's happening weeks, months down the road, and also go and view recordings of past virtual events, which has really been a big trend that I've seen. But in general, overall trends from those initial days, in the spring, early lockdown, I think we are moving from when people were just looking for online events to be a distraction, like I'm bored, entertain me, give me something to look at, to now people looking for experiences and also incorporating online events as part of their research of, where's a wine region that I would want to go to? Oh, here's a panel of winemakers talking from that region. Let me look into that. Where's a restaurant that I'm interested in going? Oh, here's a sommelier from that restaurant that's doing an event. Okay, that might be interesting. And so that's the big trend that I'm seeing, at least particularly on the consumer side. I think trade is kind of developing its own thing. And Expo, like VinExpo, doing hybrid affairs and part online, part in person. That's going to be another big trend that we're seeing, because the huge advantage of online events is always going to be its global reach.
Exactly.
How one event, this platform, you can reach almost anywhere. And especially with it being recorded after the fact, you'll still continue to reach people days, months, years down the road. And so from the trade, we need to, just as Pauline said, we need to kind of learn how to, harvest that and make the most of that while still not losing that human touch. And that was something that we did see with that whole smorgasbord of explosion of early online events, is they got very robotic, very repetitive, the same event, and people got bored.
Yeah, no, I've looked through the calendar and there's such an array of so many different types of wine events, and it gives you lots of great ideas for things to do in the future too. Variations of different things. But for many of us, entering the matrix or the digital sphere was a new experience. Seemingly overnight, Somms became Zoom experts, all of us. But Hendrik, this wasn't new to you. You understood the digital appeal long before many of us as one of Germany's first real online wine presence. Can you talk a bit about how you made the move from the floor to the screen and why you did that? Did that change during COVID, or if that's so, then how?
I finished basically working the floor in 2008. And I was still struggling in which direction the wine world would go. And I would look for some examples, which I could see at that time. I had a chance to go to New York to visit Gary Vaynerchuk, and I went to his show. I'm not sure if you're still aware of it. It was a hilarious thing. And there I learned something which basically changed my life, because before I was hired for TV shows, I was writing for papers, for magazines and so on. But I could never tell my story or the things I felt in my heart. And while I was working in a first-class restaurant, I was connected with a certain clientele. It's not that I like them or anything, but let's say after 12 or 13 years having the same position, I felt like wine is my thing. It's not necessarily to be a sommelier in a posh restaurant. So I felt much more, I'd like to connect wine with more people. And basically, I stumbled upon the internet, basically, and I thought, this is the loophole I have to go through, and I can meet people, which I probably would have never in the restaurant where I was working, as it was kind of a formal restaurant. So you have a certain kind of clientele. So this is basically, that was the first move. And then from that, it started. At the beginning, we had Ustream and other platforms, which were, I think, quite simple to what we have or what we see now. When I see how we can connect here on Zoom, how we can basically display let's say, vintners, maps, we can make virtual become a part of reality. And I think this is why I'm very grateful being a sommelier in my former life and now being an importer, wine importer and a wine merchant. I still look at this platform as a sommelier. I'd like to connect with people. I'd like to talk to people. And I think the mistake many people make is that they think they can boost and scale everything. If you have to stay personal here, you have to connect with people. You have to take it serious, what they say. It's not about us, it's about them. And we can use this tool to increase our reach, and we can basically do what we want to do from our heart. which I think is the most important thing in this business. Or let's say it's very satisfying to work for something what you really like. So after the 13 years in the restaurant, I felt a little bit bored, and I was so happy to basically find out that the internet is the next new thing, but the rules are the same as in the restaurants. Talk to people, connect with people, communicate, be serious, be funny, be whatever you are, be yourself. That's very important. And I think there's a couple of rules I just said, or a couple of things which I've learned on this journey. There's much more. I think there we are. And what COVID was, I think, Pauline, you mentioned it, it was like a boost, or it was like a speeding up in that regard, that people would look differently at the world. And I'm very happy when things become normal, but I don't think that the internet in this regard, Zoom, online tastings and all this, it will stay. It will not go away. It might slow down now for a minute, but it will become part of our life. It becomes something very normal. And think of our CO2 exhaust. You are sitting in Norway, I'm in Germany, Amber and Pauline, you are in England, and Anais, I think you must be in France. So let's say we can do a good chat and helping maybe some people to do something, or basically to inspire other people who look at this format, and give them some good ideas about how they want to change their life or want to make it better, or business aspects, which are very interesting too.
I totally agree with you, Hendrik. And I like very much what you said in the beginning also, that you have a global reach. And when you get to talk to people, what I like with Zoom and whatever platform it is that you use when I do wine tastings, I like the fact that I can actually communicate with someone in particular, because the names are there. And when you do a tasting for many people at a fair or with a big audience or something, you don't have that personal connection. Like now, if this was a big group, I could pick out someone. I said, hey, I can see that you're really enjoying the wine, or what's your opinion? And people feel seen in a different way, I think, than what they do when they're standing in front of you at a fair and you're trying to explain something to 4 people at the same time. But Anais, Vinexposium is one of the leaders when it comes to international wine trade fairs. And how has Vinexposium adapted to a virtual strategy, especially when it comes to networking and the face-to-face communication? So integral to the trade fair experience. It must have been quite a big challenge and a challenge for you.
It is, yes. Very happy to take part of the to be around this virtual table and to share ideas today. At Vinexposium, I'd say that we had no choice. We had no option, because we were not able, not allowed to open our physical events. So we had to go to the digital, but it was not new to us. Actually, as a major organizer, we've incorporated digital tools for many years to improve our customer journey, to communicate in the most efficient ways. So it was not new. I would say that 10 years ago, we started working on the matchmaking solutions. And a few years ago, we started to stream live or on demand our contents. So digital was not new, but what was new was the temporality, because we went from an annual calendar with physical events on different months to an annual calendar with physical event plus a digital ecosystem to animate and to fuel with different opportunities. So it was very, very interesting, but very different. During the pandemic, we ran four digital events. We started with Vinexpo Shanghai in October 2020. It was the very first one. Then we kept on with WBWE Connect in November, which was much business oriented, I'd say, with a big matchmaking challenge. Then we ran the Women in Wine session in March, and we ended up in June with Wine Paris and Vinexpo Paris goes digital. And I'd say that it was the only alternative we had during the crisis, and it created a lot of learnings, and it was very interesting in terms of dynamism within the industry. we saw new entrants coming. There was a lot of ideas, as Hendrik said, like so many people were trying to do things, to propose things, and it was very interesting to us to kind of mirror all these alternatives. And actually, what we created was to still the same thing as our core business. It was to connect people. That's what we wanted to do, and we did it as we could, and we learned a lot. Now, to tell you the truth, we just look forward to opening our physical events. And to us, the digital ecosystem, the digital innovation that we took in place are going to come to enhance our physical event, to provide more. Actually, what we want to do is really to augment the experience we're going to be able to give to the community, and we're going to be able to develop to serve the business, the global business of the community.
Oh, that must be amazing to finally have a physical event. I went to the first wine fair or wine related fair in Norway last Thursday. It was absolutely fantastic. I wanted to hug everyone. I think everyone went around with that feeling. I want to hug everyone.
Yeah, we missed the event so much. I mean, this is a strong feedback that we have from our community, is that we're very happy with digital, etc. And this is the only alternative we have, but we want to be able to meet in person. We want you back with the physical events.
I think everyone misses that. We all have seen that some digital experience work well and others don't. And communicating with the guests at the table requires a very different approach than on the screen. What, in your opinion, makes for a successful event or strategy, and why? Amber, can you think of something?
Sure, and actually we'll kind of talk about a little bit with the trade events, because I do agree it's kind of like you want to augment it, and you think about what's the disadvantages of a trade event. Leora, you mentioned earlier, you have 4 people there, everybody's just trying to squeeze in for the pour, that kind of cattle call feel. So you have that personal connection. So utilizing the event to do that. So a lot of trade fairs that kind of did like a hybrid approach, with the matchmaking, you get 15 minutes in a private meeting with the producer. That's really effective. When you think about the educational component, how can you make an online educational component more effective versus people sitting in a big auditorium staring at a PowerPoint? Well, you can utilize a lot more things in terms of finer details. Like one of the best things that anybody that's doing an online event could do is learn how to use Google Earth. Hendrik mentioned about virtual maps.
Yes.
Everybody loves maps.
So cool.
And they love geeking out. And with things like Google Earth, with how you can kind of hone in on the really fine details of the terroir and what makes a region unique, that is a lot more vivid on a computer screen that I'm sitting here at my desk looking at versus sitting way in the back of an auditorium. So you really need to leverage those events and think, you got to think outside the box. You can't just replicate what you're doing for an in-person event. You need to take a look at the advantages that you have online and leverage that.
I agree. I really do. What about you, Hendrik? Oh, have you?
Oh, no.
There you
Sorry.
are.
Didn't press the right button. It is really what Amber said. But it's like in any situation, you need to get the attention of the person you're communicating, whether it's at a restaurant table, because I think when you work as a sommelier, you have a feeling if the guests were happy or not. I'd say 90%, and with 10%, maybe they're good liars or they just disappeared, you never see them again. But it's the same here with online events. For example, we do online tastings, we do online blind tastings, and this is a huge success. So basically, you have to engage people. And so we ask Tim Atkin, for example, if we have the subject of South Africa, you see all the vintners, you see Tim Atkin giving a quote, maybe Jamie Good, or some famous person or wine writer, or even some other people, let's say other sommeliers. We try to get them as references, and then we have around, let's say, 300 to 400 people, depending on the event, which are participating. And now you think of sitting in a classroom or in a hall and doing an online or doing a course or presentation with 300 to 400 people and try to have them for 2 hours. Impossible. Most people are, after 1 hour, they just shut down their system and they're not participating. They might sit there, they might taste with you, they start talking, it eventually becomes loud. It's going to be very difficult for you as a host to get them in a physical event. In an online event, it's different because it's them and they have to engage with you. And then basically maps, maps, little videos, interviews, other hosts, references, and you can make it a very, like a crimi. It has to be a little bit like that because it's our job to make wine more interesting to them. For us, it's already interesting because I think everybody who's sitting here in this panel likes to drink wine and is very much engaged. So it's the others we are talking about. And that's therefore, I think it's very important to be emotional, in my case, to be emotional, to be engaged, but to always see it's not us who's important, it's the others.
Exactly. No, I think that's makes for a good point as well. Anaïs, what do you think makes for a successful event or a strategy?
Well, we're still learning. Each time is a new event with new learnings, but there are probably 4 tips that are very important to us, and that we've learned. The first one is to be able to, but as for a trade show, to engage, as say Hendrik, to engage the community, to activate your community, because you can get the best platform, you can get the best subject, but if you have no audience, it's not going to be very useful. So you have to do the job to invest as much effort, as much energy in the community engagement. The second one is probably about the technology itself. It really needs to be simple, to be easy to use. No need to look for something very complicated, very sophisticated. It needs to be available at any time from everywhere, even from China, which is always a big challenge. But it's very important to be simple and to think of your customers very
user friendly.
Oh yes.
Yeah. No, I agree. There's a lot of people, myself included, that are not that technical.
Yeah, I mean, if you have to fight for 10 minutes to connect to the content to the service you want, you're just gonna like shut down your computer and go do something different. So it goes without saying, but it's very important for those who are going to start in the digital ecosystem. Another learning, something we learned very strongly, is that the digital ecosystem is highly competitive. There are a lot of alternatives, going from other digital events to medias and probably other alternatives that are very different also. It's about cooking when people are at home, or taking care of the kids, or like people are a lot of opportunities to just disconnect from what you're proposing. So you have to be very attractive on what you're proposing. Good speakers, good subject, just attract the people and choose the best person to talk and the best service. So this is very important. And probably the last one is to stick to your audience. For instance, we do target an audience of professionals, going from winemaker to buyers, international buyers, sommelier, etc., and we have to stick to this trade audience and propose the services and the content they're expecting, answering their needs, answering their issues. And that's really what we tried to do during the pandemic, and the issues were numerous.
I can imagine it must have been quite challenging. And you, Pauline, what do you think makes for, or in your experience, what makes for a successful event?
Well, I like loads of things that have been said, and I like how also Anaïs has said that now when you organize a physical event, which is also my case, you have to think, how can I augment the experience so it's better than a digital event, right? If we can do it in digital, why should we do it in physical? So it's back to the first question you addressed me. That's why it's in a long-term shift as well, because people will think twice before traveling anywhere. So you have to make it better than it, or you have to have something else that the digital space could bring. what I also liked, what Hendrik and I think everyone said, is you've got a global audience, and everyone talked about the audience and everyone talked about the public. And I think that's one of the biggest shift which is happening in the fine wine world, is people are finally thinking about the consumer and not just the product. And in a physical event, in some ways, because you are physically trapped in that door, I mean, the presentation can be not really interesting and people just talking at people. You are obliged to stay and actually try to focus on what's been said. In a digital space, you can just close your computer and walk away if you're not interested. So to the point that Hendrik and Anaïs and Amber have made, you really have to focus more on your audience. And that's an interesting thing, as well, at least in the fine wine world. What I've seen is that tension between global and local, you know, between producers usually go like living in a local environment, but suddenly in digital having a global audience. And it's a lot of change. It's a lot of change in the vocabulary that you use. It's a lot of change of the culture bias that you can have, because suddenly, I mean, I'm French. You're not just talking with French people that eat the same thing, that have a common ground with you. You can talk with people across the world that have no idea of the reference that you're using. So I think one of the key to add to everyone else has said, that knowing your audience also means knowing yourself and knowing your bias, and also trying to find in the story that you want to tell, what's going to be more relevant and interesting for your audience, and conveying it in a way which is the most inclusive possible. Because that's something that digital really change, is you will have people from all kind of backgrounds in front of you sometimes, and you've got to make sure that not only the story you tell, but the way you tell it will let them come in and not close the computer and walk away. And that's one of the big change too. And that's funny, because Anaïs been telling about community, she's been using that word quite a lot. And also one of the things we've been seeing in the big study that we've done is that shift in the fine wine world in particular, from gatekeepers to gate openers. And that's really something that's been emphasized by digital. And I think Hendrik, I'm really glad you're here, because you're the perfect example to embody that shift, because sommelier are traditional gatekeepers, right? Because you list the wine in your wine list, you allow the wine to have a market and to have an audience. So in the traditional definition of gatekeepers, sommelier are the gatekeepers by excellence. What has been changing in their role in the digital space is they become gate openers. As you say, you not just talk about the wine in the audience in the framework that you have, you can talk in a very different way that creates bridge, because you really understand what the audience wants, you really understand the wine, and you make it happen for everyone. And in that new digital space and in the new sphere of like digital event, I think sommelier have such a big role to play, because they understand the need of the consumer. That's how they've been trained. They understand their wine, so they're also respected by everyone in the wine trade, but they know how to create a speech content that would make it relevant. And if you become personal, if you engage with the needs of your community in a digital way, then that makes a very successful event. And I think everything that you've said, Hendrik, is to my point, like really going from being gatekeepers and letting the wine in that little space to being gate openers and spreading the wine in adapting the content to a wider audience. I hope that makes sense.
It does. Thank you. Hendrik, yes.
Yeah, if I can just reply to Pauline, I think you thanks for basically giving a very good summarization. Another thing I was thinking is that especially sommeliers are very close to the product. So thinking yourself as a brand, being, let's say, exposing yourself with the world or with online tastings and so on, you basically have a lot of trusted content before you start, because people know if you're working the floor and opening a lot of bottles of wine, that you are able to distinguish between the qualities. And I'd say this is I think the most trustful person sometimes when you have a very good sommelier. And then again, it's about communication, and this is not about closing the doors. So when you're a good communicator, but look at the best sommeliers in the world, which I admire a lot of them. Most of them are great, skillful, very humble ladies and guys who are basically understand the situation and the role of the other person. And I think this is a good advantage. So I would like to encourage more sommeliers to show online and to show a little bit of how they work, what they think. And I think to make the people who are interested into wine, to make them a little bit more smart and, let's say, more curious about what they do or what we do as a wine business on a glance.
I agree, and there are so many talented sommeliers out there, and it's great to watch them on Instagram lives or Facebook lives doing lots of things, and there's room for so many more, absolutely. But there's been a talking about infotainment. I always think about you then, Hendrik. There's been a lot of talk recently about communication through infotainment, like we just said. And how important do you see the role of humor in the digital somm experience? What are some other communications tools that you find crucial in the digital worlds versus the physical one? Because I mean, wine can be a lot of fun, or it can be quite dry and very boring, depending on how you share it. So how can you make a wine event more humorous without it just being like a not informative enough?
I think humor and online is a very difficult thing to match. I think we all learned this, and I guess, yeah, sometimes it just doesn't work. Honestly, sometimes I look at people, what they do online, and it's what we say in German, there is a word for this, I'm not sure how it translates into English, Realsatire. Basically, they are expose themselves and then being funny without that they know that they're funny to all the people who watch it. So that's already hilarious what I've seen, some things. On the other hand, I think it's important to show the other side of the business, which is fun, as you were stating. Leo, you were mentioning passion, you're mentioning this kind of vibes. And I think it's something you have to have in yourself, something you can't create. But I think the best aspect is, or the most, I say if you really be yourself, nothing can happen. But just be yourself. And I've seen too many people acting like someone else. I think it's wrong. Just be yourself. Try to give the best information you can do. And yeah, please, if you want, be funny or make jokes or whatsoever. But I think it's just all in you. You just have to talk like you're being amongst some colleagues or friends, and feel like you're at a small table talking to each other. And this is, I think, also another thing about online. People think they're closer to you than they actually are, but they are very close.
Yes. Pauline, you wanted to...
Yeah, well, if I just can comment on this, because on the other end, I had loads of comments from women sommelier or women professional. When you have someone like Hendrik that says you have to be personal, you have to be who you are, that doesn't mean you have to show your whole personal life. And I think it's an important thing to distinguish, even when you're on social media. You can be personal by the way you represent yourself or the way you show your work. It doesn't mean that you've got to be personal and that you have to give everyone access to your personal life. And I think that's really important to understand, because it's kind of creating, I know that people don't like that word persona in marketing, because certainly it's called and it's not true, but it's slightly different. You can have your own persona because you are very personal in the way you present. You don't need to give access to your personal life. And I think that scares a lot of women going in the area of digital, because they can be attacked in different ways than men. You don't need to have that. You can balance both, I think.
Yeah, well, it's a fine line there, I guess. Amber, did you want to say something too? I thought I saw a hand up there.
There was a comment that Hendrik made about, you shouldn't try to be something else. And it reminded me of Pauline's comment in her intro, that the feedback she got from a lot of producers of, they weren't comfortable doing the digital and, doing the presentation. And, that we saw a lot of really horrible virtual wine events of, winemakers that just weren't comfortable. And I think the biggest missed opportunity in virtual events, especially early in the pandemic when everything was locked down, was utilizing the Somm community, because they are personable. They have the skills to, what they're doing at the table, to translate that more easily in a digital space than a lot of winemakers did. And so one of the things that would have been a really quick fix is, if you're a winemaker in California and you're not really good at this, there may be a great Somm in Germany or New York or elsewhere that you can utilize the internet to be a moderator or just somebody to talk to and have that conversation that feels more natural. And that would have improved the quality of so many virtual events. So use the Somm community without a doubt.
And to Amber's point, and again, to my point at the beginning, it's a big shift between being a product-centric industry, when everything is about the wine, how it's made, how it's been. We know we're never going to be, I had that discussion with the Specialty Coffee Association, right? Because we talk about the definition of fine wine a lot. We talk about a lot of what specialty coffee is. For them, specialty coffee is whatever's special to the consumer. I don't think fine wine will ever be that consumer-centric, because production will always have an important role. But it doesn't mean that you can't have your consumer, your client, your drinkers involved in your world. And somms are the perfect, bridge between that, because they understand production and how important it is to convey the uniqueness of a non-commodity wine, but they also understand the need of the audience. That's what they've been trained for all their life. So to some extent, a good somm, what is doing or she's doing on the floor, what all they have to do is find a way to communicate that in a digital space, and maybe work a bit on their personal brand and on the personalization of how, because to Hendrik points, I think in loads of restaurants, you can't be as personal in the way you present, because you work in a certain frame, you work like in a 3 Michelin star restaurant, you can't really make the joke you want, you can't really be the professional persona that you want. You can do that in the digital space. So again, as Amber said, use the Somm community, because there's the perfect link between the passion, the precision of the winemaker, but also the communication and the educational part.
I love how you just changed that whole question that I asked, what are some other communication tools, into the Somms, obviously.
Somms.
The communication tools you need to use. And that's great. But I want to go a little bit back to what you said, Hendrik, about engaging your audience. You have to get their attention, make a joke, make them feel comfortable, all of that. And I totally agree with you. But then I came to think, there's a lot of different cultures. And Anais, you work with wine people from all over the world, from very different cultures, especially in Asia, towards Europe, and I mean, all over the place. And are there something you think you have to kind of like think about and watch out for when you do digital events in different parts of the world? Because I mean, obviously, different cultures think that humors differ extremely much all over the planet. So how do you cope with the fact that you have so many different people with you when you try to bring maybe humor or things like that into your events?
Well, we usually work with many speakers, with many partners, etc., when we create content or conferences or digital events on the planet. And this is true that I totally agree that humor works very well if you have a talent for it. If it's a personal way of expressing something, then it's very powerful, because it can give a lot of personality, of charisma to your presentation. But then if you're not very talented for it, just forget about it and just focus on your talent and your own style, I'd say. So what we usually do when we work on content, we think of which community we're going to activate, which is going to be very different between a Vinexpo Shanghai versus Wine Paris and Vinexpo Paris, for instance. And we usually select our speakers and our issues in a different ways. So for Vinexpo Shanghai, we decided to work with strong personalities, very well known in Asia, etc., etc. So that to make sure that these people can adapt to the culture.
Would you then do like the same event with the same speech, more or less, or the same presentation and everything, but then adopted with maybe a Chinese person for the Chinese market, not because of the language, but because of culture and things like that?
Yeah, the subject and the issues can be very different versus the market. So each digital event, each trade show is a different story. So we build like all the program, you know, to provide something very, very relevant for the community.
It's an added spice to think about things like this as well, I think. But what has been the biggest digital success for vinexposium?
That's a very good question. As I said, we run 4 digital events. I guess that the first one, Vinexpo Shanghai, was very, very demanding and was probably the most challenging one, because it was happening in China. So we had to make sure that it would work in China, in Chinese, which is very different. And we had a lot of first time, I'd say, on a digital scale. So it was the most challenging. But until now, the most rewarding was Wine Paris and Vinexpo Paris, which took place in last June on our digital platform, because it gathered all our European community, and it brought this sense of closeness, of collective that we're very attached to. So very, very exciting as well. But you know what? I guess that the biggest success is yet to come, because our next Wine Paris and Vinexpo Paris will really embrace both the physical events and the digital empowerment with the digital portal. And I am convinced that digital is going to bring its full performance in combination with the physical events. So next February is going to be a big time for us.
Good luck. It's going to be exciting. And for the 3 of you, Amber, Hendrik, and Pauline, what is the biggest surprise success event in your opinion, and why? Let's start with you, Pauline.
Well, I mean, for us at ARENI, we normally do like in real life think tank, and we bring people together around roundtables, and we also do some conferences and stuff. And I had not a lot of doubt in how the conference format, like the webinar like today, would work online. I was really surprised how the roundtables really work on an online format. So the roundtables that we do, we select 8 to 10 people around one big question that will impact the future of fine wine. And we had them on Zoom instead of having them in a physical roundtable, and they're quite long, they're 2 to 3 hours, but people were really engaged. And what I've seen is the digital format allow a better balance in speaking, because you don't have side conversation that happens. You have people that really have to follow what other people are saying. People don't interrupt each other because there's only one people that can talk in Zoom, and not different voices at the same time. So we had like working sessions that were really, really more efficient through the digital format that were actually what in like on real life format would do with all the distraction. So to me, that was the biggest surprise, having that kind of workshop with international people tuning from Australia and New York. You have to find the right time zone. That's the most challenging thing, the right time to organize it. But when you do, then you can have people from everywhere sharing in a more, I also found that, as Hendrik said, you feel closer to people in a digital space. You straight away share more than what you would do in a physical environment. People actually shared a lot more. Trust is built in a different manner. So if you're careful again about those language barrier, about the bias, about sometimes humor, that being aware that your humor might not be understood by everyone the same way when you've got an international audience. If you're aware of those things, then it can really be successful.
I agree. We've seen this in ASI a lot as well. We've been using Zoom all the time, and yeah, you can split into rooms, and it's a great way to work. Amber, what has been the most successful or surprise success event for you?
Oh,
You must have seen a lot.
Yeah, there's quite a few. I can name drop quite a few. I will say ARENI's, I participated in that. The Fine Minds for Fine Wine conference was really good. And actually, just to go a little bit of the opposite, like she was talking about, you know, the sidebar conversations, and Hendrik mentioned that earlier too. There is ways to utilize that kind of effectively, especially with longer presentations, because it is human nature to get distracted. And if you have like a good moderator working the chats, you can have a lot of really good chat conversation that's not distracting from the spoken conversation that's going on the screen. And an example I'll give of that, and I wish they were still doing this, but Robert Joseph, the writer, and Polly Hammond of Five Forests, during the pandemic, did the real business of wine, you know, Zoom conference. They had really engaging panels, great topics. And often the chat would just be hopping with other people, you know, just the audience adding their own insights. And so they felt like they were a part of it. And occasionally, you know, like Robert and Polly would bring them in and they would talk and actually participate in the panel. But even if they didn't, as somebody watching it, you got two great shows, basically. You got the main event, as well as really good conversations with people that had the similar interest to you. And so I thought that was really effective.
That made me want to watch that. I didn't see that. Is it still in your calendar to be, you watch it later?
Real Business of Wine. They uploaded them to the YouTube channel. So you can also search YouTube and find them.
Cool. Sounds like, sounds very interesting. What about you, Hendrik?
Well, I think, Amber, what you just mentioned, I think this is exactly what it is. The audience is much smarter, or let's say would like to engage much more than you think. Well, I just asked my colleague, this was a very nice event for us. I hope you can see it. We received an award. Yes, but we invented a format here called Make Your Altglas Container Great Again.
Make your what?
Waste glass, what we have in Germany, we have all these waste glass containers everywhere. Oh. And during the pandemic, people drank a lot of wine at home. So we decided just to collect all the wines, the empty bottles we've had at home and drinking with friends or with our families, and bring them to the waste glass container. And we did a format, it's either on Facebook or on Instagram. And we did it live, and we basically talked about every bottle which we would throw into the container. And people really liked the idea, because with every bottle there was a little story. And then you met people at the container, interesting people, businessmen. I was even selling wine at the container. I had ladies who never drank wine and tell me the story why they never would drink wine. So we would make little interviews, and it was very instant. But I think that is a part of the deal in the business where we are in, that we have to attract people to the wine we are drinking and to give them reason to drink better or more interesting wines, whatever that means. So we received an award for this. I thought it was a lot of fun, and we try to invent as many events like this. We went and visit restaurateurs and did blind tastings, but live. So that's the interesting part. So you have to be really good. You have to be instant. You have to be truth. You have to be genuine, truthful, genuine. Stick to yourself, and people can learn a lot from that.
I want to see one of these shows.
You can just go on our profile or my profile. And
on Facebook?
Facebook or Instagram is even better.
On Instagram. Oh, perfect. Sure I'm going to do that. Sounds like.
However, so this is I thought was very interesting. One of my colleagues here invented this at the office. Yeah.
It's great. We have so little time. I have so many questions. I have an extra question in addition to the other questions I'm going to be asking you, but what happens to your digital event when you're trying to reach the people and they go off with the camera? How do you keep their interest? How do you know they're there? Because that's one of the challenges I've had lately. If you have a tasting for a big corporate group or something, nobody wants to show their face. Maybe they're listening. I don't know. How do you engage them? How do you keep them there? I think people don't want to.
I've got the problem with students, because I teach as well. I teach wine marketing in a commerce school in France, and we had to teach online. And that's the big problem, is that suddenly you're in front of your computer alone with just the names of the students and you have no idea who they are. Well, first you can ask them to turn up the videos, and also reassuring them in the fact that if they're not like camera ready with makeup and stuff, that it's okay. And then, as Amber was saying, I found a lot of power in the chat. And there's loads of people that sometimes don't engage with the camera on, which makes that quite challenging as a teacher because you can't really feel the room. But then you can use the chat to give them side exercise. So again, as Amber was saying, try to give them two teaching lessons. So you give them an exercise at the beginning of the first 20 minutes. And when you're explaining the next point, you want us to do the exercise. Or you want them to start thinking, and then you can see the names that people are not reacting, and then you go and you get them in. But it's a different job as a teacher, and I think it's the same for event. It's very different job. Are you here to just present and then you give your talk and then you're gone, or you're here to engage and really make them part? And I think that's something as a presenter that you have to be ready for at the beginning. You've got to prepare yourself for that, because you have to prepare yourself to go and get the audience and bring them in, regardless of the fact that you can see them or not. But it's a bit of a mind shift for the presenter, I think.
Yeah, it is. And there are so many things to think about. Amber, yes, please.
I think we all need to be mindful, especially at this point, is there's so many people that are just zoomed out. And so there is going to be that disengagement that's going to kind of be natural. And I think eventually we'll hit more of an equilibrium. And I think we're going to get to the point where when we do all these online events, when you're sending the invitation, you're explaining the event, almost like we have a dress code, business casual and such, it'll be, this will be an on-camera event. And we'll have that as part of the description. So people have that expectation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I forgot to say also is give them a chance to interact with you when the event is over. Because in some of the events, people are turning off the cameras because they are driving, but they would listen to what you say very carefully. And that's the same with podcast, audio, or video and replay. We also have to think as presenter of the people that are not going to watch live or will not be able to engage with us live. And there should be a way, some places, maybe a follow-up or a place on social media or anything you can think of, that those people that for one reason or another haven't been able to engage with you live, that they could do it in a slightly different time frame.
Yeah, agreed. Hendrik, yes.
Yeah, just one little thing to add, but I think we all have to respect the privacy mode of some people, and some people just don't want to show their face. It's also something very private when you are basically broadcasting yourself. So this will refer to what Pauline said, that you have to be also aware that you keep a kind of a distance in between you and the audience, and that you have to also respect that they have their privacy as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. We're coming to an end very quickly. I actually have one more question, but there came in a question as well from Valeria Tennyson from Russia. She asks, are people ready to pay the same price for a digital event as for an in-person one? What do you guys think? Anais, maybe you can answer first, as you are really in the big fair trade.
Well, I guess it's going to be pretty different. On our side, we decided that our audience doesn't have to pay to get online content. They come to the show, and coming to a physical show means that you're going to pay something. You're going to come for 3 days. It's very different than consuming a service or content online. It's really different in terms of usage. So for now, we're working on a freemium access for audience. Very different for producers, which are going to come to promote their brand, promote their products, etc., etc. So they have to pay something, but it's very different in terms of pricing than a physical trade show.
And for the rest of you, what do you think? Are people going to pay eventually as things are normalizing a bit more and people understand that digital events have come to stay? Obviously, Amber, I mean, there are a lot of digital events that you're promoting that are...
Most definitely. I'm seeing that in the data. I mean, we're nearing in on about 14,000 events that we've featured on virtualwineevents.com. And in the beginning, there was a lot more free events versus paid events. And those definitely got a lot more clicks, a lot more people interested in those events. It was like almost 3-to-1, I think, at its peak of about July 2020. And then since then, it's almost flipped entirely to where now paid events are getting way more clicks and attention than free events, partly because the paid events usually have something a lot more interesting, a component to them. There's a theme, there's more interesting personalities, while the free events are Wine Wednesday happy hour, things like that. And those are getting ignored now. So people are willing to pay. It's just marketing 101. You just have to sell them on what's the value. Why is your money worth it?
Yeah, good point. Hendrik.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've been starting with our events 10 years ago online, and we've always asked them to pay. But you, of course, in exchange, you get a wine. And I'm a big fan that, let's say, when you work as a sommelier or in the wine trade, people have to understand that it's not all fun of it. It's basically your living. You're basically subsidizing there, or you are paying for that. With that money, you're paying your life. So I think people, and this is exactly what Amber said, I think people have to get away a little bit from that kind of happy hour movement towards really focused, good online content, and it's paid. And I think people are happy with that because they get something for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And we sell a lot of online events each year. It's pretty much, it's not bad, 150, sometimes 200 euro for an event, for 2 or 3 bottles of wine.
And it's at every end. We've seen during the pandemic, there's a very high end shop here in London. They sold tickets for more than £1,000 for like online tastings. So it's not, even for fine wine, you can go with online tastings quite high if, again, as Amber was saying, you master the marketing 101, like what's the value? What do you bring to your audience? What are they going to get in exchange? If it's not quality, if it's boring, if the wines are not in a great conditions, if the speakers are bad, then of course they're not going to repeat the experience. But if it is, then they know it's curation again. And as Anaïs was saying, there's such a big competition in the online space. There's so much noise.
Yeah.
So when you master everything, when you've got a great curation of content, wine, and speakers, then I think people will be willing to pay some price.
Yeah, and also obviously, like Hendrik was saying in the beginning, it's a global audience, or even if it's not global, like in Norway, we've seen that digital tastings, it's huge. And even now when it's opening up and we're going back to normal in real life tastings, then you miss that audience that you did reach before in the digital sphere, and they're still there and they're still willing to pay. They want to come to the events. So I think there's still a lot of potential for a lot of digital events and more things that we can think of. Really, really quickly at the end now, I have one last question, and you get to say one each, because who are the people or platforms that you believe are leading the way when it comes to wine in the virtual sphere? So what people or platform? Anaïs. Obviously, Vinexpo.
Actually, to be frank, yeah, we hope to be part of this digital transformation, and we actually want to be at the center of embarking, like everybody else in the industry, within this digital dynamic, I'd say. So we're going to upgrade and we're going to fuel our digital ambition and our digital portal, of course, but to us, digital is not the final destination. To us, the final destination is to bring more to the industry, is to bring more content, more services, and more business at the very end, because it's our core mission as a trade organizer.
Yeah. Yes. And Amber, what are the platforms or people you believe will be leading the way when it comes to wine in the virtual sphere?
In all honesty, I don't know if we found the one really great platform to lead the way. I mean, Zoom's got some good things. It's got its limitations. Instagram Live, really, really big early in the pandemic. But again, the data I'm seeing is just kind of, people are losing interest in it. I'm really intrigued with, again, some of the hybrid platforms that a lot of the trade fairs like Vinexpo are doing. I think that has a big potential of really revolutionizing our trade And also, especially in a time when everybody's worried about climate change, sustainability, with miles, I don't think we've seen the best yet. I think it's still yet to come.
Good. We have something to look forward to. What do you think, Pauline?
Well, I think that the people that have done the best job are the people that, again, use digital as a tool, but as a big part of the global strategy. And they knew who they were, and they knew who they were talking to, and they just used digital to accelerate it the way and accelerate relationship. I don't know if I should quote people, because then everyone else will be mad I didn't quote them. But I mean, in the UK, there's always Hannes Grape and Tom Harrow that have been doing really, really exciting things. And 67 Pall here in the UK as well, in the sphere of fine wine. They've been very, very dynamic. So they know their community, they know their wines, and they use the digital just in an efficient way to connect. And then in the US, you also have people like Erica Davis and the SIP. And there's a bit more, again, it's really trendy, but in a good way. It's like also using those digital platform and wine to empower. So in that case, empower women and empower women of color, for example, and also using wine to achieve something greater than just drinking wine together, but give people confidence, give people a voice, give people visibility. And I think that's also a very, very good way to use digital in like not just focusing on the wine, but focusing on the life of the people that drinks the wine and how you can use wine to empower them or upgrade or help in some ways.
Yeah. And Hendrik, what do you think?
Yeah, if you want to be successful, I think they're all important. All those platforms were mentioned. And I think if you want to play hard, you have to understand that on each platform, you might need a different approach, how you want to talk to people. Let's say Facebook, it's basically, it started 10 or 15 years ago. People were around mid-20s. These people are now in their 40s or even older. So age is a different, or let's say age is a thing which you always have to consider. But another platform I really like is Winefolly, winefolly.com. I like her style. That's a fantastic site. It has so much information and she always gets my attention, and I like to follow her page as I like to follow her social media activities. There you can see that she's a real person, that she's really engaged with the product, that she loves what she does. And I think that's the best currency you have in this world and in this wine business.
Great words at the end here. Thank you all so much for taking the time to join us and to offer your experiences and insights. Be sure to keep an eye on our social media channels, as we will be talking throughout the month about different pairings and asking for your input on new favorites, old classics, and what exists beyond the grape, which leads us into our topic for October month, indigenous varietals. So Cabernet, Sauvignon, Merlot, Chardonnay, household names, obviously inside and out in the wine industry. But what about Frappato, Completer, or Cazzetelli? In today's pursuit of authenticity and individuality, many indigenous varieties are finally getting their deserved day in the sun. So join us as we gather a panel of somms and experts from around the world to talk about some of these exciting grapes, their importance to their respective regions, and how they might be on the way to a more sustainable future. So for those of you watching now or watch in the future, join us on October 11th, 3 p.m. CET or CEST. I believe it is, maybe not anymore then. We've maybe passed into winter time or anyways. Thank you all so much, Amber, Pauline, Anais, and Hendrik. It's been great having you today. Really nice conversation about a lot of interesting digital topics. And for those of you who caught us in the middle of the webinar, don't worry, it's going to be put up on our YouTube channel, ASISomms, in the coming weeks. So there are possibilities to watch it again or watch the whole thing or any of our previous webinars. So thanks again, everyone, and see you all in a month. And thanks to you guys. Come on, just keep that wine information coming out of all these digital platforms.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you so much.